Okay, starting right from the beginning, when you first sow a new sward, a lay of grasses and clovers, there are things that you really need to be aware of right from the outset. Those are the effects of some general pests, things like slugs, leather jackets, wireworms, and cutworms, those sorts of things. Now, wireworms and cutworms are the larvae of beetles, and they tend to be a little transient and of not great effect. But leather jackets and slugs can have a dramatic effect on the establishment and success of your new reseed. Slugs, where they're present in large numbers, can take up to something like 60% of all the seedlings that are developing in a sward. And so you really need to be able to identify where you might have a slug problem and take steps to avoid it. Now, slug problems are much greater on heavier soils because they have a higher moisture content. And also, as those soils dry out, they form cracks, and the slugs can use these cracks to source moisture lower down in the soil, and therefore can survive in drought conditions in heavier soils to a much greater extent than they do in lighter soils. So if you can identify that you have a potential problem from slugs, then you need to do something to counteract that. And using different forms of baits when you are sowing your seed or just prior to emergence is a very effective way of controlling the slug at that very vital moment of seedling emergence. Fruit fly is potentially a very dangerous pest of all grasses, be they forage grasses or cereals. I think we tend to think of them more as a problem with the cereal pests, with the cereal situation, but they can be a very important pest of grassland, particularly during the establishment phase again. Fruit fly the larvae live in the developing shoots of the grass plant and can damage and kill that shoot as it develops. And you can imagine that if you've only got a very small number of shoots in the developing seedling, then it can have a dramatic effect. Also, fruit fly can have up to three generations a year. So if you do have a fruit fly problem, it can develop very, very quickly and to very, very large extent, causing huge problems. All of the problems with fruit fly tend to develop later in the season. So if you sow late in the season, you're likely to develop a problem with fruit fly compared to an early season sowing. So if you can sow early, it's a good way of avoiding fruit fly attack. There are treatments for fruit fly. Once you've identified that you've got a problem, there are treatments, and they can very effectively treat and control fruit fly. But it's something that you need to be aware of, and something that you need to take steps to control. Fruit fly is present in all swards. It's just that in the establishing sward, it can have a dramatic effect because you are reducing the amount of food that is available and only presenting it with its crop plant. So it can have a really huge effect.